Hey, everybody. We are back for another week of the Digital Brainstorm presented by Microsoft Advertising. I'm Geoffrey Cologne, the head of Microsoft Advertising's brand studio, and I want to make sure that I bring in my partner here and colleague, Aya. How's it going?
Hey, Jeff. Doing good so far. It's beautiful weather today. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. Thanks for asking. So things are good on your end?
Yeah, I'm doing well and really excited about today's topic.
Yeah. So, what do we got planned for today? I think it's based on a blog post that we keep churning out here for the brand studio. Maybe a favorite topic we like to touch on. What is that topic?
The topic is shopping from home, or as you put it in your post, it is home shopping club. We're seeing quite a lot of that. That's pretty awesome. So the three things that we're going to break it down into is number one, the extremely online trend we're seeing. Number two is that your home is now your home base is basically everything you're doing from home. And the third one is the trend that's kind of likely probably to continue the DIY prosumer. Like what is it that you're doing on your own, and how are you as a consumer becoming also as a producer of your own goods and services? So those are the three things. And before we jump into each of them, Jeff, are we good to maybe introduce the new engagement offering that we have today?
Yeah, if people have questions and they're watching us on LinkedIn or YouTube, feel free to use the engagement area to ask us any questions on the topic that we're talking about. Or if you have other things that don't even fall into the topic, we're happy to take those and research those and maybe talk about it on a future episode. What do you think?
Yeah, I love that. Let's definitely have a little bit engagement with the audience and make sure that we address some of those questions or comments.
All right. Well, home shopping club. One of the things that you sort of noted is that we're at home more. So, like, what are some of the interesting things based on some of our research that we're finding out there?
Yeah, so last week our Insights Live was there, and they presented basically retail insights of stay-at-home consumers. So as we're all in this club together of stay-at-home clubs, we're now starting to do all the activities there. And the first one is that we're starting to shop, obviously. And the insights that our team has presented on that regard is that post-COVID, so March 14th is when the US declared the COVID-19 as the national emergency. And since then the very next week, there is a bump in the search query demand as how people are searching online in terms of the retail within the retail categories. And we'll dive into categories specifically later, but the demand is growing. So that first week it was 6%, following week it was 19%. And then the most recent week that they pulled, which is the 25th of April, was 37%. So it's an increasing trend that we're seeing of people turning online and shopping online. And
Now,
the
now,
other, yeah,
oh, oh, I was going to
no, go
say
ahead.
there's a term that's been utilized the past couple of years. We call it extremely online. Usually it was for people who are influencers or lived their life online. Could you say, based on this data, more of us, even if we didn't consider ourselves to be extremely online, are in that category now?
Well, yes, I do, because we are kind of forced to be online. There's no other way for us to connect with the external world, if you will, and no way to shop other than online, if unless it's, groceries. So I'm taking that out of the main category. Do you shop online, Jeff? Were you, I guess, let me rephrase the question. Before COVID-19, were you an online shopper? Would you consider yourself an extremely online consumer?
Yeah, I'd say it was a hybrid. There were certain categories that were definitely in the physical realm that are now over in the digital realm. groceries being one of them. I'm probably following the trend like everyone else of BOPIS, buy online, pick up in store, or curbside pickup, where you buy your groceries online and then you go and pick them up. So that you're, not having to be in a physical store, not necessarily based on fear or anything of that nature, just more or less convenience, and the fact that it's just, I think, easier to do for the family. So I think that's falling into a behavior that we'll want to watch over the long term to see if that sticks.
Yeah, in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that. So a marketer does think that this is probably one behavior that will become more or less permanent. And this was a trend before. Now it's accelerated as the majority is starting to adopt. So it's likely to be sticky post-COVID. So Jeff, when reading the article, I guess we wrote it together. There are some categories that we saw seeing a boost because of COVID-19. What are some of those categories, and do any of those relate to you personally?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, well, first off, I mean, if we look at the categories, you have food, grocery and cooking, computers and
Right.
consumer electronics, sports and fitness, hobbies and leisure, beauty and personal care, home improvement and construction, occasions and gifts and apparel. I mean, I think the sports and fitness and hobbies and leisure definitely are two categories. I'm in, and we've seen bumps on those in terms of their year over year search change. So it's been interesting there. I think what's also interesting based on the data we have, is apparel and occasions and gifts are in the negative territory, which I guess really shouldn't surprise any of us at this moment.
Yeah, they are in the negative territory, and this is like a snapshot of before COVID announcement, year-on-year growth changes, and then post-COVID. While that's true, there are, if you look by week trends, the occasions and gifts and apparel are actually starting to trend up. So if we do this analysis, maybe in a few weeks, we are expecting to see a positive trend. We know from Mother's Day, it was a huge surge. We did a report on that. It was the very first one that we covered. We saw From You flowers had huge demand, and certain categories were definitely seeing a boost in there. Apparel, I think it's obvious. It will probably depend whether it is, the sporting type of apparel, or kind of like evening gowns and things like that. It'll probably be different. But we are seeing that trend to continue to improve over time. But what's important here, I think, is that the top 5 or the top 6 that you highlighted there, like the sports and fitness and food and groceries, no brainer. We're all doing that. Consumer electronics, I think that's happening because of the stay at home and working from home situation, as well as your homeschooling. So a lot of kids now need to figure out how they're doing their education from home. I know that, like my neighbors had to buy 2 different computers for their kids, which they didn't have at home.
Yeah. I think that's why we're seeing the bump in that area. That's definitely a good example.
Yeah. So with that, what do you think, for brands and for our, high level marketers, what should they take from this as far as their planning, like for the next year, maybe starting the next fiscal year, whether it is, or calendar year? Do you feel like they should consider going more online and invest heavily more into the online spaces?
I mean, I think that's what we're starting to see more of, based on, again, some preliminary research is, if companies aren't cutting back on marketing spend, they're definitely reinvesting it in areas where they can reach, consumers. It sort of reminds me of what we talked about last week on our Brainstorm, which was, how are you, repurposing some of those marketing dollars in areas that, maybe you have not spent as much in. Also, how are you using it to reach audiences that, basically might be lookalike audiences or similar audiences that you can be in front of. I personally think this is an area that's just going to continue to grow as more companies realize, how do they use their dollars that they may have used on event marketing or out of home marketing in this area. Again, a short-term shift. We don't know the long-term implications of it. I think that media mix will, figure itself out over the long term as things change around us. And again, we want to continue to research that so people watching have that information and can make the right strategic moves based on what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we wrote it in one of the posts is digital shelf is being very important. So now it's even more important to grab the attention of the user to make sure that you're not below the fold, that you are kind of optimizing towards the top of the pages, whether you're selling through Amazon or selling through different retailers or even direct to consumer. That's a whole different topic that we talked about with D2C brands accelerating their kind of speed to get to that space.
Yeah, I would totally agree.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the your whole house is your home base? I love that title, and I feel like I don't play baseball, but but do tell more.
Yeah, so this second one, if we think about it, everything is now shifted where your house, apartment, flat, adobe, whatever terminology you're using for basically where you're living, is now the sort of like ground zero for what you do. And what we've seen from this Aya in our research again is, our homes are now basically not just a place that you chill out in and sleep and eat in, but it's your office, it's your gym, it's a restaurant, it's a cocktail bar, it's basically everything. So with all this, we've seen an uptick, I think, in activity in terms of people buying specific things to outfit their home. I think for the long run, fitness equipment so that they can basically have a home gym, as you noted, consumer electronics so they can have an office, furniture that they may have not had before that they can actually sit at and do work. So this basically is an interesting shift that, again, short-term implications. It'll be interesting to see where this goes in the long term and what sticking power it has, as things change around us. If that desk that you buy actually is not short-term, but you say, hey, this is basically my office that I use for 90% of the time, and the other 10% you're in a workplace or a workspace that you used to go to. That'll be an interesting trend that we want to continue to keep a pulse on.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating that you mentioned, the home office. Twitter just recently announced, as you know, that they're not going back to the office and it's stay at home permanent. A few of my friends that work at different startups are starting to see that trend. There is no longer a need to pay and, rental in these commercial spaces. I wonder, this would be interesting to see if this somewhat becomes like a permanent and long-lasting trend as people will be more and more comfortable working from home as they, figure out the logistics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that, it'll be interesting outside the tech space to see who actually is going to move in that direction. There's been a lot of bigger companies and more, I guess you would call, legacy industries, insurance, financial services, that are moving in that direction. That could mean definitely permanent behavioral shift, because I always think it's one thing if you say, hey, big tech or tech companies are working from home. Most people say, of course you are. You have the software to do that. That's sort of the culture that exists within technology companies. It's another thing for someone to say, hey, we're an insurance firm, all of us can work from anywhere. We're a financial services company, all of us can work from anywhere. And then, of course, I think the area where people will collaborate more is when they actually do need to see customers, or they're actually collaborating on what they're doing as a team. So it could change, I think, a little bit of how we actually work. And again, we don't have all the answers for that, but I think it's something we want to we want to sort of keep our eyes on and then look at over the next, 6 to 12 to 18 months to see if there is significant change there and how that changes basically consumer shopping habits.
Yeah, I'm curious with that. You mentioned, for us, we seem very privileged to be able to even work from home and do this live, and all we need is internet and computers. But
Yeah.
there's obviously a lot of different small businesses and other types of essential services that are needed that require that in-person interaction. So yeah, I think that will be an interesting topic for us maybe to cover in the future, to just kind of consider tech companies, the remote type of work versus, the in-person that's kind of needed and supports the whole economy moving forward.
Yeah. Now tell me about this DIY prosumer. This is like our third category in this week's research, the do-it-yourself prosumer. First of all, what's a prosumer? So our audience knows what we mean by this term.
Well, it's a blend of a producer and consumer. So prosumer, as we call it, as we're becoming more and more, as we're staying at home and engaging in all the activities and services is not available for us, except, the in-person ones. A lot of the times we do our own haircuts, our own, whatever it is, like cooking at home. A lot of this is happening, and we're seeing a trend in searches, how people are searching for these types of queries. For example, make is up 906%, homemade 564 projects, how to do it yourself. Those types of terms are now bringing out this new DIY prosumer. The consumers are now becoming their own producers of their own goods and services. Not, of course, to that full extent, but I think this also falls into our trend that we identified last time, brands as ingredients. So how do brands position themselves to fit into this new trend where they can supplement the DIY prosumer as they're figuring out how to cut their hair, how to color their hair, how to do workouts at home? What do you think?
Well, the interesting thing here, Aya, is it also changes like your SEO strategy, because for a long time, the big SEO strategy was a term near me. Because if you think about a mobile strategy, restaurant near me, gym near me, store near me. Now it's how to make X, how to make Y, how to make Z. I mean, this should actually get a lot of marketers to say, wait a minute, how do we fit into that category of how to make our homemade, our projects, our how to? And a lot of categories actually can fit in here when it comes to being that guide. I actually remember a couple of years ago, and I'll give a shout out to him, Mel Carson, who is a consultant that I used for many years, would say, more brands need to actually be like a guide where they say, hey, we provide tips on how to do things. And every category can do that. Because if you think about it, if you're in financial services or investing, you should be basically doing something that's how to save for retirement in your 30s, how to save for retirement in your 40s. We don't see a lot of that from companies, though. They're still sort of using, I think, a lot of older SEO strategies or sort of search strategies. So this will be interesting in terms of what I took away from this DIY prosumer trend, is this need to maybe go back and look at how are people searching for information using the terminology make, homemade, projects, how to, repurpose, DIY, and figure out what is your strategy there so that you actually are discovered when it comes to either SEO or SEM on that side of the spectrum. So I think there's a huge area for companies to take advantage of that's not short term. This could, again, be long term, where you have to think about not what's around you in the physical world, which is how we basically looked at search optimization for the past decade. It's really like, how do you help people do things? How do you act as that brand, as an ingredient, which you and I spoke of, that helps people do things?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And what you touch based on there in how I see it is that this is a way for brands that are not able to engage in business right now, to stay engaged with their consumers, to maintain that loyal base, to grow the brand loyalty, so that when they are able to come into the market, they're able to kind of, bring in their example I'm seeing is that IKEA is now sharing their famous Swedish meatball recipe. Apparently, lots of people, me included, love their recipes, love their kitchen as they go to their shops and store and shop in person. Um, so doing that is kind of like a way to engage with the consumers. What do you think, Jeff, about how do brands, if they have one source of revenue, right? If they have
Yeah.
just that services that they provide and they're kind of just can't do that right now, would you say that engaging and building a new arm, let's say they do like these tutorials on how to make things, how to do that, is there a way for them to monetize and maybe diversify their sources of income, so that they are not kind of stuck within this crisis and with nothing to do?
Yeah, I think that's been an interesting area in terms of what is your next diversified area, for your small business, for your large businesses, in terms of what you may be able to do that is related to that. So, it actually harkens back to a trend we talked about, last year, where basically you had some companies that were buying categories or investing in categories that may have not made sense to Wall Street or investors, but made sense to consumers. I think those are things that we're going to have to, companies are going to have to think about right now, quickly how they transition to those areas. If you were running a restaurant and you had a physical location, how do you move maybe more into being a ghost location? So you're actually just doing delivery and pickup for a number of people and not worrying so much about the physical imprint. If you're doing financial services and you were basically, in one area, what are some of the other areas that you can get into, based on, regulatory, possibilities. So I think those are things that we're now being forced to be much more creative in what our solutions are as businesses. So it'll be interesting to see, how this DIY prosumer trend we've identified makes businesses actually rethink what their capabilities and what their solutions are and what they actually go to offer, the market.
Yeah, that's interesting. My one of the companies that I follow, and I used to go a lot on hikes with them. It's an outdoor company. They would kind of organize a trip and you go and hike, and they also owned a coffee shop on the way where they would treat consumers where you could sit and have lunch and drink coffee. Now that they're closed and they cannot make any of this happen, they send out an email saying, hey, we're not able to do hikes and we're not able to give you like, coffee service. However, we will deliver our coffee beans if you will buy them from us. And we'll donate a portion of them to efforts, etc. So I thought that was a really cool pivot that companies may take, as to within this environment. But yeah, great talk, Jeff. I think
Yeah.
the three things that we'll leave our listeners with is that, the consumers are moving extremely online. Everything is going extremely online. Your online presence is really vital for now and then for the long-term future. Your house is your home base. You're doing everything from your home. So how do you kind of pivot that and become a brand as an ingredient to that? DIY prosumer, again, powering your customers, your consumers to do things that they're no longer able to purchase with the services. Do we have any questions or any comments on the line? I wonder if we're missing anything.
We don't at the moment, but again, if those want to come armed with questions for us, if you want to jot something down in the engagement tool, feel free to. If we don't get to it today, we'll definitely take a look at it. Come armed with it next week. We're here every Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern time, 12 noon Middle Coast time for our friends in the Midwest, 10 a.m. Pacific time, and then of course, because we're not just limited to geography anymore, I'll give a shout out to basically everyone else in other time zones of Europe and Adam, 6 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time as well for our friends over in Europe.
Yeah, and also sign up for Insights with Microsoft. It's a 5-minute daily podcast. You can download it on Spotify. Where else can we find it, Jeff?
It's available pretty much wherever you can find audio: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. You can use smart speaker commands for it. So we'll put a link in the comments section as well for those who might want to check it out. That way they can hear from us daily on what the insight of the day is.
Yeah, love it. Do we have a next week's topic?
Not yet. I'll make sure that we come back with something. We're looking at a few bits of data in a couple of different verticals. So as usual, make sure people stay tuned here on LinkedIn for our blog post, which we usually like to drop 2 days before. And then, of course, we'll talk about that, more in depth when we meet again for our brainstorm on Thursdays.
Sounds good. Well, have a great Memorial Day, guys, and thank you for tuning in and listening. Looking forward to your comments.
Awesome. Thanks again.